Good evening, everyone. Good evening, everyone. I'm Todd Miller, the program co-scheduler for the Squirrel Hill Historical Society, and I'm glad that you're here at the April meeting, and also welcome to everyone tuning in on Zoom. Before we get started with tonight's program, I want to remind you that coming up on Sunday, April 27th, we have a tour of the Passive House on Fernwald Road that the owner, Lucina de Barbara, is going to take us on to tell us about the sustainable building materials and practices that the house uses. So if you haven't signed up for the tour, please do so. We have registration forms on the table, and it should be a very interesting afternoon from 1:30 to 3:30 on Sunday the 27th. And this evening's program is South of Pittsburgh, Poems from Northern Appalachia. Our speaker is Professor Emeritus Michael Comiskey, who is a political science professor at Penn State Fayette, or is retired from that position, and he's taken up poetry as a second career. And he's going to read poems from his book titled South of Pittsburgh, Poems from Northern Appalachia. So without further ado, Dr. Comiskey, it's my pleasure.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, everyone. First of all, I'm honored and surprised that a historical society would ask me to read poems. I didn't foresee that happening. I've met Audrey Glickman. Where did she run to? Oh, back there at the camera. I met her last year. She was the first member of the group I met. We met at the Pittsburgh Festival of Books, which was truly one of the most miserable days of my life. We stood outside in the driving rain, cold driving rain all day trying to sell books, but Audrey made it better. And I want to thank Todd, who just introduced me. Yay! Have a hand for Audrey. Send it up for Audrey. And I want to thank the tech guys here who've gone through all sorts of machinations to make this work. And I want to thank all of you for being here on this winter evening in Pittsburgh, in April in Pittsburgh. Okay, now let me tell you a little bit about this talk. About a week ago, I realized that I had a serious problem. I had gathered too many materials for this talk. So let me tell you how I got into this jam and how I propose to get out of it tonight. When Todd invited me by email several months ago, he told me that if I wanted to, I could bring a PowerPoint. And when I read that, I thought, you know, poetry by PowerPoint?
No.
That's the worst idea I've ever heard in my life. Oh Lord, you know, our civilization is crumbling, you know, before us. I mean, it's going to heck. But then the more I thought about it, the more I thought, yeah, that's a great idea. I will bring a PowerPoint for two reasons. Okay. First of all, I'm always willing to try something new. Okay, so we will try it tonight. We will try poetry by PowerPoint. We'll see how it goes. If this goes well, this could be the next big thing in poetry. You know, I mean, this could be the revolution we've all been waiting for. It could be like San Francisco in the 1950s, you know, when they went to poetry readings with black berets and bongo drums and stuff like that, and kept their sunglasses on the whole time. It could be like that. So we'll see. You can tell me at the end whether it worked. And the second reason it's a great idea is that if I bring a PowerPoint, I can better tell you about the history of my town of Connellsville, Pennsylvania, 50 miles southeast of here. That's where my wife and I were both born, where we met in junior high school. It's where we still live today. We kind of like it there. And there are a lot of historical connections between Connellsville and Fayette County, where Connellsville is located. There are a lot of historical connections there between those places, as I hope to convince you very shortly. And those two towns, Connellsville and Pittsburgh, have followed very similar trajectories over the last 150 years, as I hope to show you too, at least a little bit here tonight. All right? So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to take about 20 minutes probably to give you just the foundational aspects of the connections between Connellsville and Pittsburgh. I'm going to talk about the most basic stuff. And then I'm going to take 3 or 4 minutes to talk about a lot of other fascinating things that I've learned about the history of my own town and my own county in the last month. Just in the last month, I've learned about all kinds of things that I really had very superficial knowledge of before that. And that's why my talk ended up being too long, because I kept finding out more fascinating stuff that I kept putting in my PowerPoint. But I don't have time to tell you in detail about most of those things. So we'll do the foundational stuff. And then I'll spend 3 or 4 minutes talking about the other fascinating things, which I would love to talk about if you have me back someday. And then we'll do maybe 20, 25 minutes of poetry. Okay? Does that sound like a plan for everyone? That sounds okay. Judy is skeptical that the PowerPoint is going to work, but you'll see. You'll see. Okay.
That was there.
Now, let me see. I gotta grab my slide mover here. The first part of this program is called How Connellsville Made Pittsburgh Great. And you'll see that it really, really did, right? Let's start out by looking, gotta do it this way. Let's look at a map, okay? Up here at the top of the map, this is north. This is Pittsburgh, the city of the three rivers, right? About 50 miles south of there is Connellsville, the city of the one river, the Youghiogheny River, of which we are very proud. It flows north through Connellsville like this, and it empties into the Monongahela River at McKeesport, okay? So Connellsville is located in about the middle of a coal seam called the Pittsburgh coal seam. Actually, it's a portion of the Pittsburgh coal seam, but I don't want to say that all the time, so I'm just going to call it the Pittsburgh coal seam. And this coal seam ran from about Latrobe, Pennsylvania, up this way, off the map to the northeast. It ran from there, down this way, southwest, past Connellsville, down past Uniontown, down almost to Morgantown, West Virginia, which is down in here. Okay, so this coal seam is about 50, 60 miles long. It's only about 10 miles across, something like that. That coal seam, the vein of coal, is anywhere between 6 and 10 feet thick, right? And that coal from there made the best Coke in the world. And when I say Coke, I'm not talking about the popular beverage, the pause that refreshes. I'm not talking about that other Coke that is somewhat popular these days. I'm talking about a substance that was made from coal and used to make steel. All right? So let's talk a little bit about that. All right? Now, to make steel, you need iron. And how do you get iron? Well, you dig some iron ore out of the ground, and then you heat it up until it's really, really hot. Because iron ore is just a rock that has a lot of iron in it. But it's not iron itself, it's rock that has iron in it. And to get the iron out of the iron ore, you have to heat that iron ore until it's really hot. That is called smelting the iron, getting the iron out of the iron ore. Now, in the early, you see this up here, in the early iron furnaces of southwestern Pennsylvania, they used charcoal to heat up the iron ore and try to get the iron out of it, try to smelt the iron. But that didn't work very well, basically because charcoal just really doesn't burn hot enough to do a good job of getting the iron out of the iron ore. That's the principal problem with charcoal. Just today I was watching a video on YouTube. A guy at Colonial Williamsburg was smelting iron using charcoal. And the charcoal didn't work very well because it didn't burn hot enough. Okay? So, as a heat source for smelting iron, charcoal is no good. Right? Well, what else might we use? Well, if you're in Connellsville and you're in the middle of the coal seam, maybe we can use the coal to smelt the iron. But it turns out that didn't work real well either. So here we have a piece of coal, a shiny black rock. You're all from Pittsburgh, you've all probably seen this. If anybody's watching from Connellsville on Zoom, you've seen a lot of this in your lifetime. It's a shiny black rock. And this stuff will burn at a temperature of about 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit. Now to you and me, that's really hot. But to a piece of iron ore, it's still not quite what you want. It's not quite hot enough. So it turns out that in coal, well, you tell me, what is the principal chemical element in coal?
Carbon.
Carbon. Okay, carbon. I understand, madam, that you speak Spanish out there. How do you say coal in Spanish?
California.
Carbon, all right. But coal is never pure carbon. There's always other stuff in it. There are impurities in it. There's probably some sulfur in this coal. There might be some mercury, some arsenic. There's some other nasty stuff in here. We'll just call them impurities, all right? And these impurities lower the temperature at which coal burns. They make coal burn a little cooler, right? So if you could get rid of the impurities in this coal, in other words, if you could reduce this to more or less pure carbon, then the substance that results from that process, called coke, that would burn hotter than coal, right? So our objective is to take this coal, get the impurities out, and be left with a more or less pure piece of carbon called coke, okay? And here is a piece of coke, right? This thing started out in life as a piece of coal. And somebody dug it up, and they baked it in an oven of a sort that we're going to talk about shortly, in a certain way. They baked it for about a day. And after a day, the impurities went away in the form of smoke, and what you were left with was pretty much a pure piece of carbon called coke. And this stuff will burn at a temperature of about 4,500 degrees Fahrenheit. And that's what you really want to smelt iron. That gets the iron nice and hot. This is great for smelting iron. I've also read, and I'm not a chemist here, but I've read that in iron ore, the iron is actually in the form of iron oxide. It's a combination of iron and oxygen. And there's something about the carbon in here that when it gets together with iron oxide, it takes the oxygen away from the iron so that what you're left with is pure iron. Okay? So this stuff is great for smelting iron, to make steel with. So this, ladies and gentlemen, is what made Pittsburgh a great steel-making place, and this is what made Pittsburgh great. And this comes to us from Connellsville, and that is how Connellsville made Pittsburgh great. Judy Robinson. Okay. See, that's how that happened. All right, everybody got that? Now, 6 or 7 years ago, I would have taken the coal and the coke and passed them around the room. But, you know, these days we're kind of germ conscious. Maybe you don't want to touch stuff that's been touched by 25 other people. I can understand that. So I'll keep them up here. But if you want to come up at the end of the program, touch them, feel them, whatever, you're welcome to do that. Okay? Maybe you can get your picture taken with the coke. This is the thing that made Pittsburgh great. Maybe you can tell your friends, I got some really pure coke in Squirrel Hill tonight. Okay. Some guy from Connellsville gave it to me. All right. Don't give them my name or my contact info. Okay, don't do that. Oh, if you want to know, it took about 1.5 pounds of coal to make 1 pound of coke. Everybody got all of that? Okay. Now, if you want to know why the coal from the Connellsville region made such good coke, I can tell you that. It so happens, here's my little thing here, at the Penn State Fayette Campus where I taught for 31 years, we have a great little coal and coke museum. And our website answers this very question. So let's see, here it is. This is from the website of the Penn State Fayette Campus. The purity of the Connellsville coal bed, as well as its chemical and physical characteristics, made it particularly adapted for coking. Chemically speaking, Connellsville region coal had a low percentage of ash and phosphorus, and its sulfur content was less than 1%. Okay? So that coal from the Connellsville area made great coke, partly because it didn't have many impurities in it to begin with, just a few. All right? Now let's look at one more slide here, and then I'll tell you how they took the coal and made it into coke. This is from the website explorepahistory.com. At its peak in 1913, the Connellsville district's 38,000 ovens provided fully half the entire nation's supply of metallurgical coke. It took 2,000 rail cars each day to haul it away. Most of the coke was used in blast furnaces to smelt iron ore into molten pig iron, the raw material for steel. Connellsville slipped from the national stage around 1920. Okay? So the coal and coke boom didn't last very long. It started about 1870. 50 years later, things were already trending downward. By the 1920s, they were making coke in big, centralized, efficient coke plants in places like Clairton, where they still make coke today, as you may know. And in those modern coke plants, they have ovens called byproduct ovens. So they capture at least some of the smoke, and they make useful stuff from it, like tar and oil and things like that. They didn't do that back in Fayette County in the old days. The smoke, the impurities just went up in the air. All right? Now, let's talk about how this process worked. What you see there is a bank of coke ovens. They were called beehive coke ovens because inside they're sort of dome-shaped and they reminded somebody of a beehive. All right? Now, up on top of there, excuse me, I hit the wrong thing. Up on top of there is a little railroad track. And there's a little railroad engine up here, which you can't quite see in this photo. And that railroad engine pushes these cars back and pulls them back and forth as needed. Okay? These cars are called larries. Over in England, where this process was developed, I think they were probably called lorries, but when they came to this country, they changed their name and they became known as larries. Right? Well, this larry up here is going to dump its coal into that coke oven. Right? And then somebody's going to come along with some mud and bricks and stuff, and he's going to seal up this entrance to that coke oven, right, to keep air from getting in there. In later years, in the later coke ovens, they had a door there that they could just open and close. I don't know why they didn't use a door in the first place, but they didn't. Okay, back in 1870, someone would come along with some mortar and bricks and stuff and brick this up so that the air couldn't get in there. Right? And then once the coal was in there, the heat from this oven and the heat from this oven and the heat left over in here from the last batch of coal they made in here, all that heat would start that coke to baking. Okay? And start that coal to baking, excuse me. And that coal would bake for maybe 24 hours, and the impurities would go away in the form of smoke. There was a hole up here where the smoke would come out, and the impurities would go away. And after about 24 hours, what you were left with in here was coke, pretty much pure carbon. And it was really, really hot. Okay, let me advance my slide. When the coke was done, these guys would come along and they would unseal the oven right here, and then they would squirt the coke with water to cool it down, which they had to do because by this point this stuff was really, really white hot. Right? You couldn't get near it if they didn't douse it with water. And if you somehow did get that white hot stuff, if you did get that to a railroad car, it would melt the railroad car. Okay, so they had to cool it down before they took it away. Okay? And so these guys here, they would then take their rakes and their shovels and they pull the coke out of there. These guys were called coke drawers. I'm told that this was my grandfather's first job, my father's father. This is what he did before he went to work on the railroad. He was a coke drawer. Okay? Now let me show you a sort of idyllic depiction of how this process worked. This supposedly was the Davidson Works about 2 miles from Connellsville. Okay? This is more of a depiction than anything else. It's kind of idyllic. As you see here, here's your bank of coke ovens. Up here is the locomotive. Over here are the larries. These ovens have all been sealed up. The coke is in there, the coal is in there. It's baking away. The impurities are going away in the form of smoke. Here's the last pile of coke they made a little while ago. It's waiting to be loaded onto a railroad car that'll take it to a steel mill and make steel and smelt the iron. Okay? Everyone got that? Now, that's an idyllic depiction. You can see the sky is blue here. The farms are in the background. You can always hear the birds chirping, can't you? Okay. Well, this is what it really looked like. I don't know where this particular works was, but I understand it was somewhere in Fayette County. You can see how many coke ovens they had in one place, right? You can see how dirty the air is. You can't tell whether this picture was taken in the day or the night. And if you had been there at the moment this picture was taken, you probably still wouldn't have known whether it was day or night because of all the smoke in the air. Okay? So here are the coke ovens. They're all fired up. Those impurities are going away. All that wonderful mercury and arsenic and cadmium and stuff is going up in the air for people to breathe. right? Here's our train, which has some light grayish stuff in it. I'm sure that's coke. It's ready to go off to the steel mill. All right? Okay, now, here's Coke Works. This might be what we just saw, I don't know. This was the Coke Works at Shoaf, several miles from Uniontown. I think this picture was probably taken shortly after these closed down. Okay. Like I said, by the 1920s, things were going down in the Coke business. By World War II in the 1940s, the Coke ovens were pretty much done. A lot of them were restarted during the war when there was a big demand for steel, and then most of them shut down shortly after that. Although, as we're going to see, a few of them lasted until the 1970s. Okay? So I don't see anything happening here. I think these were probably shut down, but again, you can see how many there were in one place. And here at Shoaf, like I said, this is where the last ones operated until 1972. Right? I don't know how they lasted so long. These things were really dinosaurs by 1972, but 1972, finally, they went extinct. Right? So a couple of weeks ago, when I went looking for pictures of Coke ovens to show to you, the first place I went was Shoaf, because I thought Shoaf being in use the most recently, it might have the best preserved Coke ovens. Well, when I got to Shoaf, that was the best preserved Coke oven that I could find. Okay? You can see what's happening here. Nature's taking it over. In 50 or 100 years, you won't see anything here. I do know of one or two other places in Fayette County where there are Coke ovens, and you can walk right past them and not even see them. So, especially in the summertime when there's greenery, there are leaves on the bushes and so forth. Some of them you can't even see. This same day, I also went to Bittner, Pennsylvania, which is a bit north of Uniontown on Route 51, just off of 51, and I found these Coke ovens here, sort of oddly sitting in what appears to be a farmer's field. But that's where they were. And as you can see, somebody's applying a little bit of TLC to these old Coke ovens. They're not being completely overtaken by nature. I hope somebody continues to take care of them so that they're here in the future for people to see. Okay? Everybody got that? Any questions about anything? I hope I can answer. I'm not an expert. Yes?
That work looks excruciatingly difficult for the workers.
Yes.
Were there labor unions at the turn of the century?
At the turn of the century, no. That's something I'm going to talk about briefly later on. But at the turn of the century, no way. Not until the 1930s. Yes.
I'm just curious. If the coal is cooking, what's making it cook?
Well, it's just really, really hot in there.
What's making it hot?
Well, the Coke ovens on the side are making it hot. And, the Coke ovens on the side are making it hot. And it was hot in there to begin with because they just took some Coke out of there and then they started a new batch. And that was enough to get it.
What's the heat source for the Coke oven?
The heat source? Well, once they got them going, they were pretty much self-sustaining, actually. Okay? All right. So, that's the basics. Now, let me tell you what I can't tell you about tonight because I don't have enough time. We haven't talked much about human beings so far, the workers, right? I don't have much time tonight to tell you about these old company towns. This is a company town full of company houses. These are all duplexes. In Fayette County, this is called a patch. Patches are all over the place in Fayette County. There's probably 20 or 30 of them. I don't know how many. Okay? These places were like half a step up from open-air prisons. Okay? Because everything you see here is private property owned by the coal company. And even up until the 1930s, if you didn't live in the patch, you couldn't go there unless you had the permission of the mine owner or the coke yard owner. And the people who lived in these houses, oops, I went back. The people who lived in these houses, in at least some of these places, they had to sign leases saying that they wouldn't have anybody in their house except for family members, the company doctor, and the undertaker. Okay? That was it. Those were the only people you were allowed to have in your house. So these were pretty close to open-air prisons. Okay? Well, as I indicated, these patches are still around in Fayette County today. There are, 20, 30 of them. it might be interesting to count them. This is a typical patch outside of Uniontown today. Now some of these patches are actually quite nice. The houses have been fixed up pretty well. Some of them are not so nice. My wife and I agree that this is pretty much a typical patch that you'll see in Fayette County today. Okay? This is not high-end housing here. A sociologist could probably do some interesting work in places like this. This is a pretty typical patch. Now, if you owned the coal mine or the coke yard, then you could live in a house like this. This one belonged to J.V. Thompson of Uniontown. He was kind of an interesting character, but I don't really have the time tonight to tell you about him. This is where he lived. This house still stands on West Main Street in Uniontown. It's across the street from the Uniontown Mall now. He died here in 1933. I think not too long after that, an order of Byzantine Catholic nuns bought this place, and they started a nursing home here, and they're still here. There are still a few nuns around, and they still operate a nursing home here. All right? But I don't really have the time to tell you about that. I also don't have time to tell you about how poorly the miners and the coke workers were paid. Some of them were paid in scrip, which was only good at the company store. This is a piece of scrip here. This particular piece of scrip was good for $3 at the H.C. Frick company store in Broadford, Pennsylvania, about 2 miles from Connellsville. That was the only place it was good. In my grandparents' generation, the F word was frick. Okay? That's true. I mean, he was not popular. Up here, we have a pay slip. These things come from the Coal and Coke Museum at the Penn State Fayette Campus. We have a pay slip up here for a miner, Crucible Coal Company, 1932. Okay? This guy mined 24 wagons of coal at $1.05 per wagon and made $25.20. Okay? He had another $17 coming from somewhere. So he made a total of $42.60. Okay? After he paid back the company for the privilege of working for them, okay, he ended up with $2.20 out of the original 42. Okay, that was his disposable income for the pay period, $2.20. So it really was pretty much like the old song, 16 tons, you know, Tennessee Ernie Ford, one day older and deeper in debt. That's kind of how it was, all right? But I can't say too much more about that. Now, if you didn't like living in the patch and being a prisoner and getting paid like this, if you went on strike, you and your family might find yourselves living in tents, out in the snow. This picture was taken in Revere, Pennsylvania, just outside of Uniontown in 1922. 1922 was a strike year, and they're holding a funeral here. Okay? This is one of the most horrifying pictures I've ever seen. So I'm still waiting to have my first nightmare based on this picture. It's pretty bad. And even worse, possibly, about 10 years later, during the Great Depression, some people were reduced to living in the coke ovens, like these people here. Okay? Take a look at those children for a moment. Okay? For the benefit of our Zoom participants, there's a close-up. Look at those kids in the 1930s living in a coke oven. Okay? Now, I also don't have time, whoops, there goes my watch. I also don't have time to tell you about these guys. Those guys in the white shirts were the coal and iron police who policed the patches. Right? And they were pretty brutal sometimes to the workers. Sometimes they would call in help from those guys in the black uniforms with the bobby helmets. Who do you think they were?
State police.
They were the state police. Those are Pennsylvania state troopers there, sitting on their 1922 model state police vehicle. Okay? Again, 1922 was a big strike year. Right? And sometimes, if the police and the Iron Police together couldn't control things, well, the governor would send in the National Guard. So most of these guys here are National Guardsmen. There's a state trooper, there's a state trooper, there are the people over there. This picture was taken in Star Junction, Pennsylvania, right along Route 51, about 35 miles south of here, in 1933. That's when this picture was taken. Now, I don't know too much about this particular confrontation. I do know that in 1933, in Star Junction, 6 miners were shot. I don't know who shot them. I can guess. I don't think they shot themselves. I think they all survived, if I'm not mistaken. I need to do some more research on this particular episode. But you can see the potential here for catastrophe. It's obviously dangerous. The big issue at this time was the recognition of the United Mine Workers Union and whether the mine owners had to deal with the union. Somebody asked about unions. Well, this is 1933, and the mine owners still don't want to deal with unions. And the Frick mines, which were then owned by U.S. Steel, they were the worst. They were the diehards who did not give in until they absolutely had to deal with the union. All right? I don't have time, unfortunately, to tell you about the current socioeconomic realities in places like Connellsville and Fayette County. Here are some figures that I gathered from census.gov. And believe me, I've looked at a lot of these statistics. You can always quibble with statistics. But I've looked at a lot of these statistics, and the results are always the same. No matter what statistics you look at, incomes in Connellsville and Fayette County generally are about 25 to 40% lower than the national averages, or the national medians in this case. And poverty is a good deal higher. A couple years ago in Connellsville, the poverty rate was 18% versus 11% for the country. Again, you can always quibble with statistics, but I can guarantee you, you can look at tons of statistics about Connellsville, Fayette County. It's always like this. Okay? If you're wondering, the numbers for the city of Pittsburgh are in between the numbers for Connellsville and the country. All right? And demographically, you know, the population of Connellsville has fallen by about half in the last 60 years. And much the same thing has happened in Pittsburgh since 1960. The population in Pittsburgh has fallen by more than half since 1960. And that's not all movement to the suburbs either. I mean, the population of Allegheny County has fallen by about 25% since the 1960s. Okay? That's why you find Steelers bars in places like Houston and Denver, because so many ex-Pittsburghers are living there now. All right? Okay, and I don't really have the time to tell you about this man, John W. Galbraith. But I don't have to tell you about John W. Galbraith, do I? Who was John W. Galbraith?
He owned the Pittsburgh Pirates.
He owned the Pittsburgh Pirates. He also owned Licensing, Pennsylvania. In the 1950s, he bought the town from the Frick division of U.S. Steel. Licensing is one of those coal towns. He bought the whole town. And then he sold the houses to the people who had already lived there for 50 years and paid rent for 50 years. Okay? And he was not the only one who bought those old coal towns in Fayette County, Pennsylvania. All right? But I need to find out more about that. I suppose if his lawyer were here today, he would probably tell you that it was an act of philanthropy. You know, he saved these houses, he kept these people in their homes and so forth. And I haven't researched it enough yet to say one way or the other, but I suspect he made some money on the deal. All right? Everybody got that? Okay. Well, now, let me talk about the thing that I was invited here to talk about in the first place, which I haven't talked about yet. My poetry book, South of Pittsburgh, Poems from Northern Appalachia. The title comes from Robert Frost. Robert Frost was a New England poet. His most famous book of poetry was North of Boston. So I figured if he can be north of Boston, I can be south of Pittsburgh. All right? I don't want to spend too much time talking about myself or anything. Let me just say I'm 67 years old now. Prior to the age of 50, I had very little interest in poetry. Before the age of 50, I only wrote one poem. When I was in the 4th grade, Mrs. Parr, my 4th grade teacher, made me write a poem. So I wrote a poem called Connellsville. It rhymed. I don't remember how it went. Fortunately, it's lost. No one knows how it went. But that was my experience with poetry before the age of 50. And then one day when I was 50, I just sat down at my kitchen table and I wrote a poem about the Youghiogheny River. It just came kind of like pouring out of me. I don't know why I even wrote it. I was more surprised than anyone when I wrote that poem. It was a little bit like being pregnant, or having a baby without knowing that you're pregnant. That's kind of what it was like. I just gave birth to a poem on my kitchen table, Well, I showed the poem to an English professor at Penn State Fayette, and she said, well, this is not bad. Keep writing poems. So after that, I wrote 1 or 2 poems per year. I still wasn't into it that much. Most of my poems were about southwestern Pennsylvania, the flora, the fauna, the mountains and rivers, the working class. I come from that sort of family myself. My father was a machinist and mechanic on the railroad. So that's the kind of poetry I wrote. But I didn't write much poetry until I retired at the age of 61. And even then, at first, I wasn't planning on writing a lot of poetry. I was planning on writing a book about US presidents and their economic policies. But the truth is, I didn't really want to do that. And when the pandemic came along, there I was stuck at home. I couldn't get a book from a library anywhere. I didn't want to do the presidency project anyway, so I decided, well, I'm just going to do what I want to do now. I'm going to read and write a lot of poems. And when I did that, I just got hooked on poetry completely. My wife can tell you she couldn't get me out of my study for weeks at a time. She had to come in with a hook me out of there every once in a while to take a shower or something like that. Okay, so that's when I got into poetry. All right? And by the spring of last year, I had enough poems for this book, south of Pittsburgh. There are 53 poems in here, 112 pages, about those same subjects that I mentioned a moment ago: flora, fauna, mountains, rivers, working class. There's a little bit of Appalachian folklore in here, some local dialect, that sort of thing. About half the poems in here are traditional poems, meaning they either rhyme or have some rhythm to them. That's the kind of poetry I like. Some of you know that. Half of them are more modern free verse. They don't rhyme. They may or may not have rhythm, that sort of thing. All those subjects. The poems are divided into 4 sections: autumn, winter, spring, and summer. And then there's an epilogue poem called Pittsburgh that I'll read to you very shortly here. Okay? A poet friend of mine who knows this book pretty well says that this book is really one love poem to southwestern Pennsylvania and nearby places like West Virginia and western Maryland. Okay? That's me in my book. So now, Judy, comes the revolution. Okay, or whoever said no. Now comes the revolution. I don't know if this is going to work either, so you can tell me at the end. Okay? What I'm going to do is, if I can fit the text of a poem up here, I put the text of the poem up here. If I can't do that, I'll give you a nice pretty picture in the background as I read the poem. Okay? And let's see, what did I do with it? Here it is. Let's see if I can read poems one-handed. The first poem in the book, and pardon me while I take a drink of water. I don't know about you, but I'm annoyed by people who always have a bottle of water in their hand, but I don't want to lose my voice. Okay, so the first poem in the book is called, this is tricky here. The first poem in the book is called Autumn. How many people can read that from where they are? I see some hands going. Okay.
Would you like some help?
No, that's okay. I can handle it, I think. Autumn. Those who find the winter chill adverse might rue that time of year whose essence is waning warmth and light and desiccation. Yet even they applaud the transformation of pervasive green to autumnal fluorescence, the most scenic senescence in the universe. and bask in the prospect of settling down to the prescribed perfection of the year, when all of nature resolves as it should. And in that placid atmosphere, one could almost swear that all across the hemisphere, peace and pleasant harmony abound. Then dying leaves engender a disquieting ferment. The body craves a dwindling sun that scantily suffices. No conjured intellectual devices thwart apprehension of a year soon done through inescapable descent. All those scarlet leaves turned umber stir wistful thoughts of days gone by when all the best tomorrows lay ahead. And one must ask, as Hamlet, to dread the deepening chill come nigh, or concur in wintry slumber. Autumn. Right. Now, thank you. Send it up, send it up. Okay, this next one is a sonnet of a sort. Forgot to move the slide thing. This is a 14-line poem about maple trees. Over in the Laurel Highlands, they make a lot of maple syrup. In fact, this weekend in Myersdale, Pennsylvania, in Somerset County, they're having their Maple Festival, which I recommend that you check out sometime. I see someone nodding. Did you go to the Maple Festival?
Every year.
Every year, okay. Great, too. Yeah, you should also check out real maple syrup, too. Once you try real
Yeah,
maple
you
syrup,
never go back.
you'll never go back. You'll never go back. Don't try it if you're diabetic. Okay? If you're diabetic, it will kill you within minutes because it's all sugar. It's all sugar, but it's great stuff. Okay? This one is called the maple trees. They tap the maple trees around late winter, early spring. To noble maple trees that stand astride the laureled ridges, humans come in dark of wintertime. They pierce the shaggy bark with steel and pray the maple gods provide their yearly crop of maple nectars. The trees, which use the liquids as a kind of blood, don't seem to mind. They satisfy the happy collectors. The sturdy trees, unharmed by human tap, distill their juice from water and sun and yield a dozen gallons from each one. But for humans lacking that sweet sap, a waffle would be dry and awful, nor would any naked flapjack flap. The maple trees. And let me see what's coming up next. Oh, this one's a haiku. Okay? Haiku, as you know, is a traditional Japanese form. Traditionally, it has 3 lines, 17 syllables. It's usually about nature. It's usually written to sound sort of mystical and otherworldly. Okay? This is my attempt at a haiku. I took this picture near Ohiopyle one morning a couple of years ago. Mountains, so close to heaven. Stone cathedrals where we go to lift our spirit. Haiku, mountains. Was that mystical? Okay. How many think the PowerPoint is working? So, most of you do. Even Michael works there. You know it works if Michael says it works. Okay. All right, see? We're going to be famous. This is going to be Pittsburgh poetry. You know, it's like San Francisco in the 50s, you know, when they wore berets and the bongo drums and stuff. That's going to be us. All right? Now, I don't even know which one is coming up next. So, let me see here. Oh, this is another one. This is a favorite of some people that I know. In Connellsville, we used to have a lot of things we don't have anymore. One of them is people. The population of Connellsville has fallen by half in 60 years. Now, when I was a kid there was a rather vibrant Jewish population in Connellsville. Today, they're almost all gone. They're vanished. I have a Jewish friend in Connellsville named Eddie. I asked him one day, Eddie, how many Jewish people are left in Connellsville? And he could think of exactly 3, including himself, in a town of 7,000 people. So they're pretty much vanished. And the Jewish people in Connellsville, they used to have a synagogue on North Pittsburgh Street, But the synagogue folded in the 1970s. It was bought by a Protestant congregation that's had a Protestant church there ever since. Well, at some point, the building was whitewashed. I don't know who whitewashed it or when. I'm not going to guess why they whitewashed it, but it was whitewashed. But to this day, up above the front door, there's a whitewashed six-pointed star. So the vanished Jewish population of Connellsville and that building inspired me to write this poem called The Jews of Appalachia. No one knows precisely why they came here. The early Jews of Appalachia, long since past, had motives known to God but lost to history. Perhaps it should be no surprise or mystery, though, that people so long shunned and outcast landed here after wandering 2,000 years. This outcast region offered opportunities presented by the region's major industries. But, as elsewhere, finding few unprejudiced employers, these itinerants, these dispossessed, began their own establishments, little companies that served their little prosperous communities. They built and tended well-kept homes and greatly prized hard work and education, obeyed the law and paid their taxes. As we all know, though, the fact is they achieved despite genteel discrimination, yet wished their neighbors undisturbed shalom. Dispersed again now are the Stearns and Greensteins, not by wind or edict, but by shuttered mills and mines. They've left behind born-again churches of God with six-pointed stars on their whitewashed facades. The Jews of Appalachia. Now, let me see what I want to do next. Okay, now when I do a poetry reading, I always try to do one that nobody's ever heard before, because some of you come to the Pittsburgh Poetry Exchange and you hear my stuff, and some of you are part of the very select group of human beings who's ever purchased my book. All right? So here's a poem for you called Dreaming Pennsylvania. I read a poem recently called Dreaming Alabama by somebody from Alabama named Melanie McCabe. Her poem was really good, so I said, I got to write one like that about Pennsylvania. So here it is. Dreaming Pennsylvania, after Melanie McCabe's Dreaming Alabama. I contemplate an industrial state that's 60% forest, the country's top producer of hardwoods and #1 in hunters per square mile. Mountains half a mile high and 200 miles long. Rivers cut right through them. Susquehanna, Youghiogheny, Monongahela, Conemaugh. Primordial earth disgorges 8 trillion cubic feet of natural gas and 40 million tons of coal per year. Some of the coal can't wait and burns in the ground. I picture Punxsutawney, rough and ready, bird in hand, state with more rail trails than any other. Ride the Pennypack, the Sheepskin, the Ghost Town Trail to Nantiglow, the Panhandle Trail, or the Great Allegheny Passage to Washington and take the Amtrak back. Linebacker U in quarterback country. Marino, Montana, Unitas, Kelly, and Blanda all grew up within 40 miles of Pittsburgh. I see Philadelphia at one end, Pittsburgh at the other, Alabama in between. The mountains in the middle are the DMZ. Stillers versus Eagles, Flyers versus Pens, Wawa versus Sheets, Water versus Wooder. But everywhere I taste the Holy Trinity, Halupki, Halishki, and pierogies. Call us yins or yuns or yous, but don't you call us y'all. Red up the house, bath the baby, hoover up the rug. Do the Pennsylvania polka. I dream of Lover, Paradise, and Pillow, Pennsylvania, which once was known as Schneiderstädtel. I honor the birthplace of independence in the Constitution. I honor every blade of grass at Gettysburg. I honor the peace-loving Pennsylvania Dutch, I honor America's oldest brewery. I see a sweating glass of Yingling or Iron City on a chick bar. And women I don't know who call me hun. Dinner pails, smokestacks, hard hats and high tech. City of steel to city of med and ed. Bald eagles, hellbenders, impossible Rocky Mountain elk. Dreaming Pennsylvania. Well, my time is running very short here, so what I'm going to do is, afterwards I can take questions. I could also do a book signing over there. If you'd like to have one of my books, if you could slip me a 10, I could slip you a book. I wouldn't charge anything, but it does cost me something to have them printed and shipped to Connellsville, Pennsylvania. If you buy one online, it'll probably cost you $14.95 plus shipping. You can buy one through your local bookstore, but it'll probably cost you the same. You can also purchase an ebook for like $12, a little bit less, but I can't sign it for you if you buy an ebook. Okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do 2 more poems. One about our first city of the night, Connellsville, and one about Pittsburgh. So I keep tripping over this thing. Let me advance here. Thank you all for coming on this winter night to the Church of the Redeemer. There's Connellsville, Pennsylvania, in the autumnal sunlight. That's Chestnut Ridge in the background. That's the Youghiogheny River in the foreground. Carl Sandburg wrote a poem called Chicago. And for years I wanted to write a poem about Connellsville, but I couldn't quite think of how to do it. And after I read his poem, I said, that's it. I'm going to pattern my poem on his. So here it is. Connellsville, Pennsylvania. The one-time coal and coke capital of the world. Center of the justly named Connellsville Coke region. The little city that made the big city of Pittsburgh. They tell me you're a has-been. I acknowledge seeing mills and mines and railroads nearly all abandoned. They tell me you have shriveled, and I answer, yes, the population's fallen by a half in 60 years. They tell me you are poor, and I believe them, for I see incomes a third below the national average, and schools where every child qualifies for a free lunch and breakfast. They say you lack diversity, and my reply is, yes, I see a town of 7,000 whites, 100 blacks, 10 Hispanics, and 3 Jews. And having answered so, I turn to those who sneer at this my city, and I say to them, I see volunteers removing fallen trees from the world's most beautiful bike trail, so I can ride for 60 miles to Pittsburgh, or 270 miles to Washington, D.C. I see volunteers rising at 3 a.m. to fight a fire. I see volunteers tending public flower beds in summer heat. I see volunteers cooking pancake breakfasts and spaghetti dinners for a man with cancer or a burned-out family that was uninsured. I see a comfortable, affordable house where I don't need a privacy fence or a highway noise barrier. I see Poles and Slovaks who make the best damn pierogies, halushki, and halupki, and plenty of them. God knows. I see clean, uncrowded parks. I look west and north and I see verdant hills and valleys. I look east and I see forested mountains teeming with wildlife that shares my backyard. I look south and I see a Youghiogheny River that once ran orange and now flows clear, writhing through Pennsylvania's deepest canyon and bursting through Chestnut Ridge. I see small businesses that sprout like dandelions, go to seed, and sprout again. I see endless efforts to revive the downtown and bring the jobs back. Few would call you bustling, Connellsville, but no one says you've quit. I see the home I left 5 times before I had the sense to stay. In the little city that made the big city of Pittsburgh, in the center of the justly named Connellsville Coke region, in the one-time coal and coke capital of the world, Connellsville. Thank you very much. So, now the last poem. Forgot again. The last poem. About the place that we all know and love. So, this poem is called Pittsburgh. The city America's made of resembles a model train display. Riven by rivers, ravines, and vertiginous hills, stitched by 10 tunnels and 446 bridges. Held with the lid off in Dickens' day, and long after that. Land of fire and flood, it's a hard place that its people love. And since you've asked, we're African, Jewish, Slovak, and Muslim. We've come in waves from everywhere. Germans, Hungarians, Asians of Eastern and Western persuasions. And we haven't forgotten the old ways. Nope, not the Italians or the Polish. Did I mention that we're also Irish? San Francisco has cable cars and windy seas and streets that sometimes have steps on the side. Pittsburgh has steps that sometimes have streets in the center. They climb hills too steep for streets, and bluffs too steep for streets or stairs. Here, one sees cable cars hoisted up vertices with ropes of steel. Chicago has Lake Michigan, downtown a famous skyline, the Navy Pier and Centennial Wheel, and shoulders big from lifting Pittsburgh steel. The food is really great, the pizza's really fine, but the place is flatter than a pancake. Not like here, where hills and gorges make for cozy neighborhoods. In almost every city, charms reside, whether large or small in size. New York has Le Boucherie and Coq au Vin. Here we've got Primanti's. And that's better than anything they've got, and don't tell us otherwise. Boston has its harbor and its history, but it's not home to me. Pittsburgh, you're afflicted now with banes that even your considerable brains and sinews cannot cure. The slaughter of the innocents you've known, and the daily hail of violence. ShotSpotter anchors the nightly news. The races race and live in different lanes. Your often somber skies dump punishing rains that liquefy your hills. The yawning separation of the many and the few divides you as no undergirded bridge of steel could span. If it takes a town to raise a child, can cities survive these daunting new times without the care and effort of the nation? Pittsburgh strives, awaiting that determination. Pittsburgh. Thank you, Pittsburgh, for being here tonight. Does anyone have any questions about anything that I could answer? I guess that's a no. I guess that means I've been clear. Oh, yes.
You started off your presentation talking about charcoal,
Yeah.
and I've been wondering since then, what's the difference between charcoal and carbon?
Charcoal and carbon?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, because I'm not a chemist.
Okay.
I just know that it doesn't burn as hot as coal or coke.
Okay.
Yeah, so you have to, maybe on the internet you can look that up. Yes, ma'am, sir.
Nothing to do with steel making, but are there any memorials to Johnny Lujek?
There's at the Connellsville High School football stadium, there's a field house that was named after him. That was all. There is a tree at the Connellsville High School football stadium planted there by Johnny Woodruff. Do you know who Johnny Woodruff was? He was a black man from Connellsville, won a gold medal in the 1936 Olympics in Berlin. The hosts gave him an oak tree, which he brought back to Connellsville, and you can still see that today. It's gigantic. But we don't have a memorial really to Johnny Lujek, who won the Heisman Trophy in 1947 playing for Notre Dame.
And the Levin family's first furniture store was Connellsville.
Was that the first one?
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember when Levin's was still there. The old Levin's building went to seed a local contractor bought it and fixed it up, and now it's very nice. And there's a sort of events center in there where you can have reunions and wedding receptions and things. Okay. Other, yes?
This isn't really a question, but one of our Zoom participants, one of our board members, a little nostalgia, his Ph.D. professor was Charles G. Overberger, a native of Connellsville. In case you know that name.
No, I've never heard of anybody there named Overberger. Sorry.
I just need to make a personal observation.
Yes.
Those of us who love climbing the hills around Squirrel Hill, we found 3 really good views of Chestnut Ridge from Squirrel Hill.
Oh, yeah.
Wow.
Oh, yeah. Somebody told me when I came in. I know from the top of Chestnut Ridge you can see the skyscrapers in downtown Pittsburgh.
It works both ways.
Yeah, I guess it would, logically enough. Logically enough. So, what else? Anyone else? Okay, well, I guess that's it. Thank you again for showing up. I'll have a book signing over there for anyone who's interested. Thank you so much for showing up. It means a lot to me. Really.
Thank you, Michael, for sharing your talents with us this evening. We presented you earlier with a book on Squirrel Hill and neighborhood history and appreciation for you being here with us tonight, so I hope you enjoy reading that. And again, take advantage of him being here and buy his book. And also come to next month's meeting, which is on Tuesday, May 13th. Our speakers will be Professor Rob Ruck, Professor of History at the University of Pittsburgh, and his colleague, Dr. Ed Muller, who have co-authored a book called Pittsburgh Rising, from Frontier City to Steel Town, 1750 to 1920. So should be a very interesting evening. And also be sure to participate in our Passive House Tour later this month on Sunday the 27th. So thank you for being here. Have a good evening, and hope to see you next month.